Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this third session on public deliberation on UK trade policy. This session will be on digital trade and issues of privacy and data in digital trade. My name is Maria Savona, and I'm a professor of economics of innovation in the University of Sussex Business School and part of the Center for Inclusive Trade Policy. And Javier Ruiz.
Yes, hello. I am Javier Ruiz. I am a civil society expert on digital trade and digital policy and human rights more broadly, and I'm helping the CITP in connecting with civil society and external perspectives.
Okay, let's start with the object of today's session. Today, we're going to discuss a little bit about digital trade. I mean, what is digital trade? I mean, this map is basically a representation of the extent of the submarine cables of optic fiber that connects the world globally to allow data to travel from country to countries. And this is basically what implies cross-borders data flows and digital trade. It is the possibility for you to buy something on Amazon, or basically if you're based in the UK and reserve a flat in Airbnb located in Spain, it means that the personal data you have in the UK will travel to the US, which is the location of Airbnb platform, and we also reach Spain, where you will have booked a flat. So the idea is that you will use platforms and digital trade when you access services online. And this is the core of what we're going to discuss today. And basically, Javier will illustrate the heart of the matter now.
Yes. So as Maria said, digital trade policy covers pretty much a lot of what we do online that involves cross-border information will be affected by digital trade policy. Now, the policy, what the government can do to try to affect digital trade affects two particular elements of the digital technology: data and software, which are the core of a digital system. So data are the bits of information that we send around, and a lot of it personal. It could be your date of birth, your credit card number, or some personal medical records, for example. But it's also software, which is like the computer programs and the algorithms, like, for example, the Google search algorithm, or the algorithms which are like the logic and the computer logic that, for example, decides, what kind of houses you will see when you go into Airbnb, which one, which is the computer will use the data, what they know about you, to try to give you what they think is the best offer, So now, in looking at those two key areas, of data and algorithms, the UK wants to be a world leader in digital trade. It's a really important part of UK trade policy. And the main approach is one of liberalization, which is about trying to remove any barriers to trade and trying to facilitate the free digital trade without restrictions. And that means, in practice, making it easier to send data by removing any potential barriers. But also it means that to stop any barriers to the entry of software into the country, like, for example, making access a condition for imports. And this is an example that, for example, that happens in China, where, for example, if you want to sell a particular software, say for, like detection of like HR, for example, like to process HR, human resources, you may be asked to release some of the software because they want to inspect it for safety, for example. But now what happens then in some context, then that software is then stolen, and they make a copy. They use the access to the software, with the condition of having to look at it. They abuse that access to then try to steal it. So in order to protect businesses, digital trade policies tries to put some restrictions on what governments can do to access that software. Now,
so let's Let's try to really identify what are the pros and cons of liberalizing digital trade. Javier, what are the pros?
So obviously, as we said before, easier cross-border data can allow you to access more innovative or cheaper services. For example, many people are now discussing ChatGPT, which is the new artificial intelligence system by OpenAI. And that involves you sending information to some servers that are located mainly in the US. So you can access, without digital trade or without being able to do that, you wouldn't be able to access a lot of the modern artificial intelligence services, but also cloud services like Google and many other things. But also digital trade agreements means for British businesses that they should be able to export more digital services, should be able to create more jobs, and by having protections for the technologies that will create an incentive to create more advanced digital technologies without the fear that those are going to be stolen when they get exported. Now, Maria, would you like to talk about the cons?
Yes, I'll highlight the gloomy side of this. It's good to access better services. It's good to access cheaper services. And we all know now that this implies, for example, some cross-border data flows are the main process underpinning this buying digital services abroad. However, there are side effects of this. So if we make data transfer too easy, so to allow countries to send data to other countries with lower standards, and when I talk about standards, I mean, for example, consumer standards or data privacy standards, and so on, then we risk, for example, our own personal data to be for example, jeopardized if nobody is able to control, if the country we're sending our data to are subject to lower protection, for instance. And also it can stop regulators from making companies accountable. For example, if companies misbehave with the management of our personal data, then if they're not accountable, then this can create problems. But also, on the second point, if we create some forms of protection for data and algorithms, then we also want to make sure that the state governments and regulators can scrutinize and monitor the use of data. So in general, I would say that liberalizing cross-border data flows can be offset by some prices that as consumers and data subjects we might have to pay in terms of privacy. Now, let's try to focus on why this is relevant for the UK, which is what we're deliberating on today. Javier.
Yeah. So those concerns and those advantages, the pros and cons, are they are not theoretical. They are very, very practical, because the UK government wants the country to become a global hub, really like the key place for data and digital, pretty much like the City of London is right now for finance and digital services. So all the policies that we are outlined, are quite central to making this happen, but also will have wider implications for the country. And also, after Brexit, the UK is moving or trying to move closer to the US and the Asia-Pacific region, like Australia, Japan, India, as where they see that there is the higher economic growth. But those countries, they have actually lower privacy and consumer protections. So the issue, sending data there, could have some practical implications for the cons that Maria raised before. And then the other thing that is quite important in terms of the protection of technology and also the sense of exporting is that British companies overall, it's not clear whether the UK will be a net strong exporter of digital technologies, or whether access to cheaper digital technology abroad will mean that overall, the value added to the data would happen elsewhere. So it would be that UK companies are actually net buyers of digital services overseas, which means that those jobs and innovations will be created elsewhere and not in the UK. And now, Maria, would you like to help us then summarize?
I will summarize then what we've been discussed so far. So what we are willing to raise for you is basically this main trade-off. I mean, let me summarize for you what we are deliberating on. So ideally, we have seen how, for example, making digital trade and cross-border data flows easy and open up a digital trade might have some benefits. Some of these benefits are that we can access the services offered from other countries. I mean, we've seen, for example, Airbnb. We can actually, by a click, we can buy stuff everywhere in the world. And sometimes this implies better quality, sometimes this implies lower prices and so on. However, we might need to think about what are the costs related to make this digital trade too easy. For example, if we allow digital trade with countries that have lower standards in terms of privacy or in terms of access of the regulators to some forms of monitoring, for instance, then we might have consequences in terms of having technologies and digital trade completely unregulated. And this might impact your life in certain ways. For instance, if we're all free to use ChatGPT, and this is a form of digital trade in the end, then we might reduce the ability of the regulators to see, for example, whether this particular OpenAI is, for example, facilitating the increase of fake news. Or, for example, for health records that we're going to discuss in case one, we need to be particularly careful in trying to understand how a completely liberalized digital trade might create side effects. So this is basically what we're going to discuss today, and we look forward to continue the discussion with you. Thank you very much for your attention.